A billionaire was still a virgin at 46, until a bleeding waitress collapsed at his gate. He thought he'd shut the world out for good. No love, no family, just silence and gold. But the night she fell into his arms, everything changed. She wasn't just a stranger, she was a survivor running from someone who wanted her gone. He takes her in just to help for a night. But one prayer, one act of kindness, starts a chain of miracles no one saw coming. As her little girl calls out for help miles away, his cold mansion becomes the only place where faith still burns. But when the world finds out, they'll call her a liar, a gold digger, a scam. He'll have to choose between his spotless reputation or the only love that ever felt real. What happens when a man who never let anyone in opens his gate to grace? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Lorenzo Westfield's Colorado estate, casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floors. At 46 years old, Lorenzo had achieved what most would consider the pinnacle of success. His renewable energy company dominated the American market, and his wealth afforded him every luxury imaginable. Yet, as he walked through the silent halls of his mansion, his footsteps echoing in the emptiness, that success felt hollow. The staff moved like shadows around him, their voices barely above whispers when they needed to communicate. They had learned over the years that their employer preferred the quiet, needed it even. The only sound that seemed to bring him any comfort was the steady tick-tock of his mother's antique grandfather clock, standing tall and proud in the main hallway. Lorenzo paused before it now, his fingers ghosting over its polished wood. The clock had been his mother's pride and joy, a family heirloom that had survived generations. Unlike him, who survived but didn't truly live. "Good morning, Mr. Westfield." Martha, his housekeeper of 15 years, murmured as she passed by with fresh linens. Her voice was soft, practiced in the art of being present yet unobtrusive. "Morning," he responded, his own voice rough from disuse. When was the last time he'd had a real conversation with someone? The board meetings and business calls didn't count. Those were transactions, not connections. He made his way to the breakfast room, where a single place setting awaited him. The morning paper lay folded beside his plate, the headlines blaring about his company's latest acquisition. Success after success, dollar signs and profit margins, that's what his life had become. The day passed, as it always did, in a blur of video conferences and spreadsheets. From his home office, Lorenzo could see the misty valley below, the mountains rising majestically beyond. It was beautiful, he knew that objectively. But he couldn't remember the last time he'd truly felt that beauty in his soul. As evening approached, storm clouds gathered over the peaks. Lorenzo watched them roll in from his study, the room growing darker with each passing minute. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and for some reason it stirred something in him. A memory of sitting with his mother during storms, her voice gentle as she read from her worn Bible. The rain started, first a gentle patter against the windows, then a steady drumming. Lightning flickered across the sky, illuminating the room in brief, harsh flashes. Lorenzo stood at the window, his reflection ghostly in the glass. "Lord," he whispered, surprising himself. How long had it been since he'd prayed? Since his mother's funeral? Since the day he'd decided that prayers went unanswered and faith was for those who couldn't make it on their own? But something in him broke open tonight, like the sky above. "Lord," he said again, louder this time, his voice shaking. "If there's still something left for me, if there's still hope." He swallowed hard, fighting against years of built-up walls. "Send it through my gates." The words hung in the air, feeling both foolish and profound. Lightning cracked again, closer now, bright enough to make him step back from the window. The thunder that followed was immediate and deafening. Lorenzo turned away, chiding himself for this moment of weakness. He was a businessman, not some character in one of his mother's beloved inspirational novels. Life didn't work that way. Prayers weren't answered with convenient timing, and miracles didn't just appear on doorsteps. Then he heard it. A scream, high and terrified, cut through the storm's fury. It came from the direction of his front drive. Lorenzo froze, his heart suddenly pounding. The scream came again, and this time he was moving, his feet carrying him swiftly through the house. He hardly noticed the startled looks from his staff as he rushed past them. At the front door, he hesitated for just a moment, his hand on the handle. The rational part of his mind told him to call security, to let them handle whatever was happening outside. But something else, something that felt suspiciously like his mother's guiding hand, pushed him forward. He threw open the door, and the storm hit him full force. Rain lashed at his face, and wind whipped his normally perfectly pressed shirt. Lightning flashed again, illuminating his circular driveway and the scene before him. The scream had come from somewhere beyond the gates, out where his private drive met the main road. Through the curtain of rain, he could see the faint glow of headlights, tilted at an odd angle. Lorenzo stood there, water soaking through his clothes, facing a choice. He could go back inside, call the authorities, and let them handle whatever had happened. That would be the sensible thing to do, the safe thing, the thing that fit with the careful, controlled life he'd built for himself. But he'd just prayed for, the first time in years, and somewhere in his heart, a long dormant voice whispered that this moment, this choice, mattered more than he could know. The rain continued to pour, and Lorenzo Westfield, Billionaire CEO, stood on his doorstep, letting the storm wash over him as he faced what felt like the most important decision he'd made in years. His mother's clock chimed inside, its familiar sound carrying even through the storm. And suddenly he knew what he had to do. He stepped out into the rain, each step taking him further from his safe, silent world and toward whatever, or whoever, waited beyond those gates. The wind howled around him, and another flash of lightning illuminated his path. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Lorenzo felt truly alive. Something was about to change. He could feel it in his bones, in the electricity in the air, in the way his heart raced with both fear and anticipation. He reached the gates, punching in the security code with trembling fingers. As they swung open, thunder rolled overhead, and Lorenzo squared his shoulders. Whatever he found beyond these gates, he knew with sudden certainty that his prayer had been heard. Whether this was answer or test, or perhaps both, remained to be seen. The gates finished their slow arc, and Lorenzo stepped through them, leaving behind the carefully ordered world he'd built for himself. The rain continued to fall, but now it felt less like punishment and more like baptism, washing away years of isolation and fear, preparing him for whatever lay ahead in the storm-dark night. Another scream pierced the darkness, closer now, and Lorenzo broke into a run. His expensive shoes slipped on the wet pavement, but he kept going. The headlights he'd seen from his doorway grew brighter, and now he could make out the shape of a car, its front end crumpled against one of the old oak trees that lined his drive. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat seeming to echo his earlier prayer. "Send it through my gates." Well, here he was, outside those gates for the first time in what felt like forever, running toward a stranger's cry for help in the middle of a storm. Lightning flashed again, and in that brief, brilliant moment, Lorenzo saw everything with perfect clarity. The car, steam rising from its damaged hood, the oak tree, its bark scarred from the impact, and most importantly, the figure moving inside the vehicle, desperate and afraid. This was it, the moment his evening prayer had led to. Whatever happened next would change everything, and Lorenzo Westfield, the man who had spent years hiding from life behind his wealth and walls, was finally ready to face it. Lightning illuminated the dark road as Lorenzo fumbled with his flashlight, its beam cutting through the sheets of rain. The wind howled around him, pulling at his clothes, but he pressed forward. Another crack of thunder shook the ground beneath his feet. Then he saw her. A figure slumped against the iron bars of his gate, one hand pressed tightly against her side. Her dark hair was plastered to her face, and even through the rain, he could see the red staining her white uniform shirt. "Help!" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Please! He's coming!" Lorenzo rushed forward, his heart pounding. The woman's face was pale, her eyes unfocused. She was young, probably in her late 20s, wearing what looked like a diner uniform. A name tag reading Rose was pinned crookedly to her shirt. "I'm here," Lorenzo said, kneeling beside her. "You're going to be all right." He shrugged off his jacket and wrapped it around her trembling shoulders. She tried to focus on his face. "I couldn't let him hurt Mrs. Jenkins. She's 72. Arthritis in her hands." Her words slurred together, pain etching lines around her mouth. "Don't try to talk," Lorenzo said. He slipped one arm under her knees and the other behind her back, lifting her as gently as he could. She was light, too light, in his arms, and he could feel her shaking. The walk back to the house seemed endless. Rain pelted them both as Lorenzo carefully picked his way up the drive. Rose's head lolled against his shoulder, her breathing shallow but steady. As they approached the front door, it flew open. Ruth Callahan stood there, her usually neat grey hair disheveled, her face tight with concern that quickly shifted to suspicion. "Mr. Westfield, what are you doing? We should call the police, not bring her inside. This could be a trap." "Enough, Ruth," Lorenzo said, his voice firm as he carried Rose through the doorway. "She needs help. Call Dr. Matthews." Ruth's mouth set in a hard line, but she pulled out her phone. Lorenzo carried Rose to the nearest guest room, one that Ruth always kept ready just in case, though no one had used it in years. "The sheets," Ruth protested weakly as Lorenzo laid Rose on the bed. "Can be replaced." He finished. "First aid kit, now please." Ruth hurried away, her footsteps quick and sharp on the hardwood floors. Lorenzo turned his attention back to Rose, who was stirring fitfully. "You're safe," he said softly. "You're in my home. No one will hurt you here." Her eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding their deep brown depths. "Where?" She tried to sit up, but fell back with a gasp of pain. "Easy," Lorenzo said, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You're hurt. Help is coming." Ruth returned with the first aid kit and hovered anxiously as Lorenzo cleaned the cut on Rose's side. It wasn't as deep as the blood had made it appear, but it would need proper medical attention. As he worked, Rose drifted in and out of consciousness, fragments of her story emerging in broken whispers. She was a waitress at the Valley Diner. Her manager, Doug, had been harassing Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly server, pushing her to work faster despite her arthritis. When Rose stepped in to defend her, Doug had lost control, shoving her into the sharp edge of a counter before chasing her into the storm. "You stood up to him," Lorenzo said softly, taping a bandage in place. "That was brave." "Stupid," Rose mumbled. "Could lose my job. Hope needs that money." Before Lorenzo could ask who Hope was, Rose's eyes flew open wide. She looked around the room, really seeing it for the first time. The elegant furnishings, the expensive artwork on the walls, the crystal chandelier overhead. "Oh no!" She pushed herself up, wincing. "I can't. I shouldn't be here. I need to go." "You're not going anywhere in this storm," Lorenzo said firmly. Through the windows, lightning still flickered, and rain lashed against the glass. "You're hurt. It's dangerous out there, and you said someone was after you." "But I'm getting blood on your sheets," she protested weakly. "And my clothes are soaked. This room probably costs more than I make in a month." Lorenzo surprised himself by chuckling. "The sheets don't matter. What matters is that you're safe." Rose sank back against the pillows, tears mixing with the rain still drying on her face. "Why are you helping me?" Lorenzo thought about his prayer earlier that evening, about the years of emptiness in this huge house, about the way his mother had always welcomed strangers in need. "Because you needed help," he said simply, "and you're safe here for as long as you need." Ruth made a small noise of protest behind him, but Lorenzo ignored it. He could see the exhaustion in Rose's face, the way she was fighting to keep her eyes open. "Rest now," he said softly. "Dr. Matthews will be here soon. We can talk more when you're stronger." Rose's eyes drifted closed, her breathing evening out. Lorenzo stood, turning to face Ruth's disapproving frown. "We know nothing about her," Ruth whispered harshly. "We know she was willing to risk her job and her safety to protect an elderly co-worker," Lorenzo replied. "That tells me enough for now." Thunder rolled overhead, and rain continued to pour, but inside the guest room, Rose slept peacefully, safe from both the storm outside and the one she'd fled. Lorenzo watched her for a moment longer, feeling something shift in his chest, something that felt like purpose, like the answer to a prayer he'd almost forgotten he'd made. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows, painting golden patterns across the expensive bedding. Rose blinked slowly, her mind foggy with confusion as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. The bed beneath her was softer than any she'd ever slept in, and the room, it was bigger than her entire apartment. Reality crashed back suddenly. The diner, Doug, running through the storm, the kind stranger who'd helped her. She sat up carefully, wincing at the tenderness in her side where Dr. Matthews had stitched her up the night before. The clock on the bedside table read 7:15 in the morning. Hope would be waking up soon at her neighbor Mrs. Chen's apartment, wondering where her mama was. A gentle knock at the door made her jump. "Come in," she called, pulling the blankets up higher. Lorenzo Westfield entered, carrying a silver tray laden with breakfast. He moved with careful precision, as if afraid of startling her. "Good morning," he said softly. "I thought you might be hungry." "You didn't have to," Rose began, but her stomach growled loudly, betraying her. A slight smile touched Lorenzo's lips as he set the tray on the bedside table. "The doctor said you should eat to help with healing." He hesitated, then gestured to a chair near the bed. "May I?" Rose nodded, studying him in the morning light. He was tall and distinguished-looking, with silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. His clothes were obviously expensive, but he wore them with an unconscious ease that spoke of someone who rarely thought about such things. "How are you feeling?" he asked, settling into the chair. "Better, thank you." Rose looked at the tray. Fresh fruit, yogurt, toast, and what smelled like really good coffee. I don't know how to thank you for everything." Lorenzo shook his head. "No thanks needed. I'm just glad I could help." He paused, then added quietly, "It's been a long time since I've had a guest here. 10 years, actually." The admission hung in the air between them. Rose could feel the weight of loneliness in his words, see it in the careful way he held himself, as if unused to simple human interaction. 10 years is a long time to be alone, she said gently. Lorenzo's hands tightened slightly on the arms of his chair. "It was easier that way after my mother died." Thunder rumbled outside, reminding them both that the storm hadn't fully passed. Rose reached for the coffee, taking a careful sip. "This is amazing coffee," she said, then smiled. "But I really should clean up and get out of your way. I don't take charity, Mr. Westfield." "Lorenzo, please," he corrected. "And it's not charity, it's hospitality, something my mother used to be famous for." His voice softened on the last words. Rose set down her coffee cup. "Tell me about her?" The question seemed to surprise him. He was quiet for so long that Rose thought he wouldn't answer. But then he spoke, his voice low and measured. "She was the heart of this house, always helping people, always believing the best of everyone. She kept her faith through everything, even at the end." He looked down at his hands. "I'm afraid I haven't honored her legacy very well." "Sometimes grief makes us build walls," Rose said softly. "I understand that better than most." Lorenzo looked up, a question in his eyes. Rose took a deep breath. "I work double shifts at the diner to support my daughter, Hope. Her father, well, let's just say he chose a different path. For a long time I was angry, hurt. I wanted to shut everyone out." She smiled slightly. "But then I'd look at Hope, see her smile, and remember that closing yourself off means missing out on all the good things, too." "How old is Hope?" Lorenzo asked. 7. She's my little artist, always drawing pictures, singing songs." Rose's face lit up talking about her daughter. "She says God sends good people when we need them most." Lorenzo was quiet for a moment. "Your daughter sounds wise beyond her years." "She is." Rose finished her coffee and pushed back the blankets. "Now please let me help clean up. I can't just lie here all day being waited on." Despite Lorenzo's protests, Rose insisted on at least carrying her breakfast tray to the kitchen. They spent the day talking as thunder rolled outside, their conversations flowing naturally from one topic to another. Rose told him about juggling work and single motherhood, about her dreams of maybe opening her own cafe someday. Lorenzo shared stories of his mother, of building his company from nothing, of the faith he'd once had that seemed to slip away with each passing year. As evening approached, Lorenzo surprised himself by asking Rose to join him for dinner. The dining room table was far too large for 2 people, so they ate in the smaller breakfast nook, where the storm-darkened windows made the space feel cozy rather than confining. Before eating, Rose folded her hands and bowed her head. "Would you mind if I say grace?" Lorenzo felt something catch in his throat. "Please," he managed. "Dear Lord," Rose prayed softly, "thank you for this food, for shelter from the storm, and for sending help when we needed it most. Bless this meal and the hands that prepared it. And Lord, please watch over my Hope tonight. Amen." "Amen," Lorenzo whispered, the word feeling both foreign and familiar on his tongue. As they ate, Lorenzo found himself watching Rose, the way she savored each bite, her genuine appreciation for the simple meal, her easy way of sharing stories and laughter. He couldn't remember the last time he'd enjoyed a meal this much, the last time he'd felt this present. The feeling that washed over him wasn't the sharp ache of loneliness he'd grown used to, but something different, a humbling awareness of how much he'd cut himself off from, how much he'd been missing. It was gratitude, he realized with surprise. Gratitude, and maybe something like hope. Rose caught him lost in thought and smiled gently. "Penny, for your thoughts?" "I was just thinking," Lorenzo said slowly, "that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as storms." As morning light filtered through dissipating clouds, Rose made her way to the vast kitchen where Ruth was organizing breakfast preparations. The older woman's posture stiffened slightly as Rose entered, her movements becoming more deliberate. "Good morning," Rose said softly. "Please, let me help. It's the least I can do after all the kindness I've been shown." Ruth's lips pressed into a thin line. "That's not necessary. You're a guest." "I'm a waitress by trade." Rose replied with a warm smile. "And my mama always taught me that capable hands shouldn't stay idle when there's work to be done." Something in Ruth's expression softened slightly at the mention of mothers and teaching. She studied Rose for a long moment before nodding toward a bowl of fresh berries. "Those need washing and sorting." Rose rolled up her sleeves and got to work, handling the delicate fruit with practiced care. As she worked, she began humming softly, an old hymn her grandmother used to sing. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. From the doorway, unseen by either woman, Lorenzo paused in his morning routine. The gentle melody drifted through the air, stirring something deep within him. His mother used to hum that very same hymn while preparing Sunday breakfast. Ruth glanced at Rose, her efficient movements slowing slightly. "My mother used to sing that while she worked too. It's funny how some songs just live in our bones," Rose replied, setting aside the washed berries. "Would you like help with the pancake batter?" To Lorenzo's surprise, Ruth handed over the mixing bowl without protest. He watched as the two women fell into an easy rhythm, Rose measuring and mixing while Ruth heated the griddle. The kitchen, usually so silent and sterile, filled with quiet conversation and the occasional shared laugh. "Mr. Westfield likes his pancakes thin," Ruth instructed, hovering nearby as Rose poured the first one. "Lorenzo," Rose corrected gently. "He asked me to call him Lorenzo." She flipped the pancake with expert timing, revealing a perfect golden brown surface. Ruth's eyebrows rose slightly. "You've done this before?" 6 years at Sally's Diner," Rose confirmed. "I could probably flip pancakes in my sleep." As the morning progressed, Lorenzo noticed Ruth's stern demeanor gradually softening. By the time breakfast was ready, the older woman was actually smiling as Rose shared stories about her daughter Hope's attempts to help in the kitchen. "She once decided to surprise me with breakfast in bed," Rose recounted, wiping down the counter. "Used food coloring to make everything purple. Purple eggs, purple toast, purple milk. Said it was princess breakfast." Ruth's laugh was genuine. "Sounds like quite the creative child." "She sees beauty everywhere," Rose agreed, then began humming another hymn as she worked. Lorenzo slipped away before they noticed him, his heart unusually full. The sound of hymns in his kitchen, the smell of fresh pancakes, the warm conversation, it all reminded him painfully of better days. Later that afternoon, while Ruth and Rose were preparing lunch, Lorenzo retreated to his study. He needed to catch up on work emails, but found himself distracted by memories of morning hymns and shared laughter. Rose, having finished helping Ruth, wandered the halls of the massive house. She found herself drawn to Lorenzo's study door, left slightly ajar. Meaning to thank him again for his hospitality, she knocked softly. When no answer came, she peered inside. The room was empty, but what caught her eye was the impressive wall of books behind his desk. As a lifelong reader who could rarely afford new books, she couldn't resist taking a closer look. Her fingers trailed along the spines, business texts, biographies, and then, partially hidden behind other volumes, a row of identical leather-bound journals. Something about their worn spines and carefully noted dates made her pause. Without thinking, she pulled one out, opening to a random page. The handwriting was younger, less controlled, but unmistakably Lorenzo's. December 15th. Mother says God never gives us more than we can handle, but I'm not so sure anymore. The silence is deafening. Why did you make me capable of love only to never find it? What's the point of a heart that beats but doesn't feel? The house grows colder each day, and I'm beginning to think that's how you want it. Maybe some of us aren't meant for warmth. Rose's heart ached at the raw pain in those words. She was so absorbed in the entry that she didn't hear footsteps approaching until a sharp intake of breath made her turn. Lorenzo stood in the doorway, his face pale, body rigid. The journal in her hands might as well have been his beating heart, exposed and vulnerable. "I'm so sorry," Rose said quickly but gently. "I shouldn't have." "Those are private," he said, his voice tight. Rose carefully closed the journal, holding it with the reverence it deserved. "They're all so beautiful," she said softly, "and heartbreaking." Lorenzo remained frozen, caught between anger and embarrassment. "You asked why God made you capable of love only to never find it." Rose continued, her voice gentle but firm. "Maybe you never found love because you stopped letting it find you." The words hit Lorenzo like a physical force. He opened his mouth to argue, to defend his walls, but no words came. Rose carefully returned the journal to its place. "Thank you for trusting me with your home, Lorenzo, even if you didn't mean to trust me with your heart." She slipped past him and out of the study, leaving him alone with her words echoing in his mind. That evening, Lorenzo sat in his leather chair before the study's fireplace, watching flames dance across logs. Rose's words played on repeat in his thoughts. "You stopped letting it find you." He thought of how she'd handled his journal, not with judgment or pity, but with understanding. How she'd seen past his wealth to his worth, past his walls to his wounds. How she filled his silent halls with hymns and his empty kitchen with laughter. The fire crackled, sending sparks up the chimney, and Lorenzo realized he felt warm, truly warm, for the first time in years. Not just from the flames, but from something deeper, something he'd thought long dead. A flutter of feeling in his chest, like a bird testing broken wings. He watched the fire late into the night, allowing himself to feel its warmth, to acknowledge the subtle thaw beginning in his heart. Rose's hummed hymns still echoed in his memory, mixing with his mother's voice from long ago, reminding him that perhaps it wasn't too late to remember how to feel. The early morning sun had barely touched the mountain peaks when Rose's cell phone shattered the peaceful silence of the guest room. Her hands trembled as she fumbled to answer it, her neighbor Martha's name flashing on the screen. "Rose. Oh, thank God you picked up." Martha's voice crackled with panic. "Hope's here with me, but she's scared out of her mind. Darren's been circling the building in his truck for the past hour. He's been asking people if they've seen you." Rose's heart stopped. Her 7-year-old daughter's face flashed before her eyes, those bright, innocent eyes that had seen too much already. "Is she okay? Please tell me she's okay." "She's safe for now. I got her into my apartment when I saw him pull up. But Rose..." Martha's voice dropped to a whisper. "He seems different this time. Worse. More desperate." Rose was already moving, throwing her few belongings into a small bag. "Keep her inside. I'm coming right now." "Be careful, honey. He's still out there somewhere." Rose's hands shook as she ended the call. The beautiful guest room suddenly felt like a gilded cage, too far from where she needed to be. She grabbed her waitress uniform, still slightly damp from the storm, and changed quickly. A soft knock at the door made her jump. "Rose." Lorenzo's voice was concerned. "I heard voices. Is everything all right?" She opened the door to find him standing there, still in his morning robe, worry etched across his face. The genuine concern in his eyes made her throat tight. "I have to go," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Right now. My daughter. She needs me." Lorenzo's expression shifted from concern to alarm. "What's happened?" As Rose explained the situation, she watched Lorenzo's jaw tighten. He pulled out his phone. "I'll have my security team ready in 5 minutes. They can bring her here safely." "No." Rose cut him off, though the offer made her heart ache with gratitude. "You've already done too much. I won't be indebted like that." This isn't about debt, Lorenzo said softly. This is about safety. Your daughter's safety. Rose shouldered her bag, shaking her head. I don't want pity, Lorenzo. I've survived on my own this long. I'll figure it out. Rose, please. His voice was barely above a whisper. At least let me help you get there. But Rose was already moving past him, her steps quick and determined. She'd learned long ago that depending on others only led to disappointment. The fact that Lorenzo's offer felt genuine only made it more dangerous. Ruth appeared in the hallway, likely drawn by their voices. Her usual stern expression softened when she saw Rose's distress. Miss McKinley? Thank you for everything, Ruth, Rose said, managing a small smile. The kitchen won't be the same without my help, I'm sure. Ruth's lips twitched. It certainly won't be as musical. Lorenzo followed Rose through the mansion's halls, his bare feet silent on the marble floors. At least let me drive you. I'll call a cab from the gate, Rose insisted, her pace never slowing. She couldn't let herself be swayed by his kindness. Couldn't let herself imagine what it would be like to accept his help, to let hope experience the safety of these walls. The morning air was cool and crisp as they reached the front drive. Lorenzo's security team stood at attention, clearly already informed of the situation. Rose wondered if Ruth had called them. At the gate, Lorenzo made one final attempt. You belong where grace takes you, he said softly, his words carrying on the morning breeze. Rose paused, her hand on the gate's cold metal. She turned back, taking in the mansion, the mountains, and the man who had shown her such unexpected kindness. For a moment, she allowed herself to see the loneliness in his eyes, the way his hand gripped the gate post as if to stop himself from reaching for her. Thank you, she whispered, meaning it with every fiber of her being. Then she turned and walked away, her steps quick and determined despite her trembling knees. The gates closed behind her with a soft click that seemed to echo across the valley. Through the bars, she could see Lorenzo still standing where she had collapsed that stormy night, his figure silhouetted against the rising sun. As Rose disappeared down the winding drive, Lorenzo remained motionless, his heart heavy with an unfamiliar ache. The morning air felt colder somehow, emptier. He closed his eyes, remembering the way she'd hummed while working, the gentle wisdom in her words about his journals, the strength that radiated from her despite her circumstances. For the first time in years, words of prayer came easily to his lips. Lord, he whispered, help me find her again. The sun continued its climb over the mountains, painting the valley in shades of gold and rose. But Lorenzo's mansion had never felt more like a tomb, its silence no longer peaceful, but oppressive. The warmth that Rose had brought with her, through her hymns, her laughter, her faith, seemed to seep away with every step she took down that mountain road. Ruth appeared silently at his side, her usual efficiency softened by concern. Sir, your morning meetings. Cancel them, Lorenzo said, his eyes still fixed on the spot where Rose had vanished. Cancel everything today. Ruth nodded, understanding in her eyes. She'd seen the change in him over these past days, the way Rose's presence had begun to crack the careful walls he'd built around himself. Now she watched as her employer, this powerful man who commanded billions with a word, stood helpless before an empty gate, his heart visibly breaking for a waitress who'd brought music back into his silent halls. The morning continued to brighten, but Lorenzo remained at the gate, his prayer a constant whisper on the wind. Help me find her again. 3 days felt like an eternity in the empty halls of Lorenzo's mansion. The familiar routines that had once brought him comfort now felt hollow, each hour marked only by the steady ticking of his mother's clock. On the first morning after Rose's departure, Lorenzo skipped his 7 o'clock board meeting. Instead, he found himself walking the misty grounds as the sun painted the mountains gold. His Italian leather shoes grew damp with dew, but he barely noticed. His mind kept returning to the way Rose had looked back at him through the gates, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and regret. "Sir." Ruth's voice startled him from his thoughts. She stood on the terrace holding his tablet. "The board is waiting." "Tell them something came up," he said, his voice distant. "Reschedule." Ruth's eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded. In all her years of service, she'd never known Lorenzo to miss a meeting without serious cause. Yet here he was, wandering the grounds like a ghost at dawn. The second day, Lorenzo spent hours in his study, pulling out his old prayer journals one by one. The leather bindings creaked as he opened them, releasing the musty scent of forgotten prayers. He found himself rereading passages Rose had discovered, seeing them through new eyes. His younger self's words struck him differently now. "Lord, why does wealth feel like chains? Why does success taste like ash?" His pen hovered over a blank page, but no words came. Instead, he remembered Rose's quiet voice at his dinner table, giving thanks for simple things. Shelter from the storm, a warm meal, kind hearts. How long had it been since he'd felt such genuine gratitude? By the third day, even his staff noticed the change in him. The usual precise schedule of meetings and calls fell into disarray. His chef reported that meals went untouched. The cleaning staff whispered about finding him asleep in his study chair, an old prayer journal open in his lap. "Mr. Westfield?" Ruth knocked gently on his study door that afternoon. "I found something you should see." She entered, carrying a small black cord. "The cleaning staff found this in the guest room. It appears to be Miss McKinley's phone charger." Lorenzo stared at the simple object, as if it were both precious and dangerous. "Did she leave any other belongings?" "No, sir, just this." Ruth hesitated, then added, "She did leave that number, just in case," she said. The paper with Rose's hastily scribbled phone number had been sitting on his desk for 3 days. He'd looked at it countless times, picked it up, put it down again. Now, holding her forgotten charger, he felt a sudden urgency. His fingers moved swiftly over his phone's keypad. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. Then voicemail. Rose's voice, warm but professional. "Hi, you've reached Rose McKinley. Please leave a message." Lorenzo cleared his throat. "Rose, it's Lorenzo Westfield. Your phone charger was found in the guest room. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I hope you and Hope are safe. If you need anything, please don't hesitate to call." The days grew longer. Lorenzo found himself taking more walks at sunrise, watching the gates where Rose had first appeared. During meetings he couldn't avoid, his mind wandered to the sound of her humming hymns in his kitchen. Each evening, he sat at his dinner table, the silence broken only by the ticking of his mother's clock. Ruth watched him with growing concern. She'd seen many women try to catch Lorenzo's attention over the years, each one drawn by his wealth and power. But Rose had been different. She'd touched something in him that Ruth hadn't seen since his mother's passing, a spark of the man he used to be before success had built walls around his heart. Miles away, in a small diner on the city's edge, Rose moved between tables with practiced efficiency. But her usual warm smile was strained, her eyes constantly darting to the door. Each time the bell chimed, she tensed, terrified she'd see Darren's face. She picked up extra shifts, trying to keep busy, to stay in public places where he couldn't reach her. Her manager noticed her jumpiness but didn't comment. He'd seen enough of life to recognize fear when he saw it. During quiet moments, Rose's hand would drift to her phone, thumb hovering over Lorenzo's number in her call log. She'd think of his gentle voice, the safety of his mansion's walls, the way he'd carried her in from the storm without hesitation. But pride and fear held her back. She couldn't risk dragging him into her mess. The night was already old when Lorenzo's phone rang. He'd been sitting in his study, pretending to read reports while actually staring at Rose's number again. The sound startled him so much he nearly dropped the device. Unknown number. His heart quickened as he answered. "Hello?" At first there was only breathing, quick and frightened. Then Rose's voice, barely a whisper. "He's taken Hope. Please help me." Lorenzo was on his feet before the message ended, his heart pounding. The fear in Rose's voice cut through every wall he'd built, every hesitation he'd harbored. He pressed the callback button immediately, but the line was already dead. The clock ticked steadily in the silence, marking precious seconds slipping away. Lorenzo stared at his phone, Rose's terrified whisper echoing in his mind. Somewhere in the city, a little girl was in danger. Somewhere in the darkness, Rose was asking for his help. His finger hovered over the security team's number, ready to mobilize every resource at his disposal. The man who had hidden behind wealth and walls for so long was gone. In his place stood someone who had finally found something worth fighting for, not because of duty or obligation, but because grace had led him to this moment. Lorenzo's hands gripped the steering wheel as his SUV sped through the darkness, windshield wipers fighting against the heavy rain. His security team's vehicles followed close behind, their headlights cutting through the storm. The clock on his dashboard read 11:15 at night, each minute ticking away like thunder. "Faster," he whispered to himself, pressing the accelerator harder. Highway 14 stretched before him, slick with rain, and nearly empty at this hour. The small diner's sign glowed in the distance like a beacon, its neon lights reflecting off the wet pavement. As he pulled into the parking lot, he spotted Rose immediately. She stood under the diner's awning, arms wrapped tightly around herself, her waitress uniform still on from her shift. The sight of her made his chest ache. She looked so small, so vulnerable against the vast darkness of the night. Lorenzo jumped out of the SUV, not bothering with an umbrella. Rain soaked through his expensive suit as he rushed to her side. "Rose," he called softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned, and the look in her eyes nearly broke him. Fear had carved deep lines around her mouth, and her usual warmth had been replaced by raw terror. "Lorenzo," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm sorry, I didn't know who else to call." Without thinking, he reached for her hand. Her fingers were ice-cold against his palm, trembling like leaves in the storm. "We'll find her," he promised, squeezing gently. "I won't let you go through this alone." Rose's fingers tightened around his, seeking strength. "The police are looking, but—" She swallowed hard. "They say since Darren's her father, it's complicated. They're treating it like a custody dispute, not a kidnapping." Thunder rolled overhead as Lorenzo led her to his SUV, opening the passenger door. His security team spread out around them, alert and watchful. Inside the vehicle, the rain drummed against the roof, creating a rhythm that matched Rose's shaky breathing. "Tell me everything," Lorenzo said softly as he pulled back onto the highway. "When did you last see Hope?" Rose pressed her forehead against the cool window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. "I was at work. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, was watching her. She called me in a panic about 2 hours ago, said Darren showed up claiming he wanted to talk to Hope." Her voice broke. "He pushed his way in when Mrs. Chen opened the door. By the time she got to the phone to call me, they were gone." Lorenzo's jaw tightened. Has he done anything like this before? No, but... Rose's fingers twisted together in her lap. "His temper. It's always been bad. When Hope was 3, I finally got the courage to leave. He'd come home drunk, started throwing things. I grabbed Hope and ran that night, never looked back. She took a shuddering breath. He found us once before, about a year ago, showed up at our apartment demanding to see her. I called the police, but by the time they came, he was gone. Rain streaked across the windows as they drove through sleeping towns, past darkened houses where families slept safely in their beds. Lorenzo's security team had split up, following different leads, staying in constant communication through their radios. I keep thinking about her teddy bear, Rose whispered suddenly. She never sleeps without it. It's still sitting on her bed, waiting for her. A sob caught in her throat. She must be so scared. Lorenzo's hand found hers again in the darkness. This time, he didn't let go. Your faith amazes me, he said quietly. After everything you've been through, you still trust. Still pray. Rose turned to look at him, tears glistening in her eyes. Sometimes faith is all we have left. When Darren first started changing, becoming violent, I wanted to be angry at God. But then I realized God didn't cause Darren's choices. He gave me the strength to protect hope instead. They drove in silence for several minutes, their joined hands a bridge between them. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating Rose's face. In that brief moment, Lorenzo saw not just her fear, but her incredible strength. There's a church up ahead, he said suddenly, remembering a small chapel he'd passed many times but never entered. Would you pray with me? Rose's eyes widened slightly, but she nodded. The chapel was a humble building, its white steeple barely visible through the rain. Lorenzo parked, and they ran through the downpour to the covered entrance. The door was unlocked. Many rural churches stayed open all night for travelers seeking sanctuary. Inside, the air was still and peaceful. Their footsteps echoed on the wooden floor as they made their way to the front pew. Rose sank down, pulling Lorenzo gently with her. Their hands remained linked as they bowed their heads. Dear Lord, Rose began, her voice barely above a whisper, protect my little girl. Keep her safe until we can find her. Give us wisdom to know where to look and... She faltered. And give us strength, Lorenzo continued, surprising himself. Help us be your hands and feet tonight. Show us the way. As they sat in the quiet church, Lorenzo felt something stirring in his heart, something he hadn't felt since his mother's death. It wasn't just concern for Rose and hope, though that burned bright and fierce. It was a reconnection to something larger than himself, a reminder that some things were worth more than all his carefully constructed walls. Rose squeezed his hand, and he looked over to find her watching him with gentle understanding. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. We should keep moving, he said softly, though part of him wanted to stay in this moment of peace. My team will have updates by now. They walked back to the SUV, the rain still falling, but somehow less threatening now. Their joined hands swung between them, a physical reminder that neither of them had to face the storm alone. As they climbed back into the vehicle, Lorenzo's phone buzzed with a message from his security team. The night stretched ahead of them, full of uncertainty and fear. But something had shifted in that small chapel. Two broken souls had found strength in each other, and in the faith that had brought them together. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Pink and gold streaks painted the morning sky as Lorenzo's SUV wound through narrow mountain roads. Rose had dozed off briefly, her head resting against the window, but startled awake at every bump and turn. Lorenzo noticed her fingers continuously moving over the small silver cross she wore, her lips forming silent prayers. His phone rang, breaking the dawn's quiet. The number was unfamiliar. Mr. Westfield? A gentle male voice spoke. This is Pastor Elijah Carter from Grace Community Church in Pine Valley. I believe I have someone here you're looking for. Rose grabbed Lorenzo's arm, her eyes wide with hope. A little girl, the pastor continued, showed up in our sanctuary early this morning. She's sleeping now, holding on to one of our brass crosses like it's her lifeline. Dark, curly hair, about 7 years old. Hope, Rose whispered, tears streaming down her face. Oh God, thank you. Lorenzo pressed harder on the accelerator, careful but urgent. We'll be there in 15 minutes, Pastor. Please keep her safe. The small white church appeared around a bend, its steeple catching the first rays of sunlight. Lorenzo barely had the car in park before Rose was out, running toward the wooden double doors. He followed close behind, his heart pounding with an emotion he couldn't quite name. Pastor Elijah met them at the entrance, a kind-faced man in his 60s with silver hair and weathered hands. She's right inside, he said softly. Poor thing was exhausted but wouldn't let go of that cross. They found Hope curled up on a worn wooden pew, her small form wrapped in what looked like the pastor's own cardigan. A brass cross from the altar lay tucked against her chest. Her face, even in sleep, showed traces of dried tears. Hope? Rose's voice cracked as she knelt beside the pew. Baby, it's Mommy. Hope's eyes fluttered open. For a moment she looked confused, then her face crumpled. Mommy! She launched herself into Rose's arms, both of them crying now. I knew you'd find me. I kept praying like you taught me. Lorenzo stood back, his own vision blurring as he watched them hold each other. Rose was on her knees, rocking Hope back and forth, whispering, "Thank you, God," over and over between kisses to her daughter's forehead. Daddy was so angry. Hope hiccuped against Rose's shoulder. He kept saying mean things about you. But I remembered what you said about God sending good people when we need them. She looked up then, noticing Lorenzo for the first time. Her eyes, so much like Rose's, studied him carefully. Rose pulled back slightly, smoothing Hope's tangled curls. Are you hurt anywhere, baby? Did he... She couldn't finish the question. Hope shook her head. I ran away when he fell asleep. I remembered you saying churches are safe places, so when I saw the cross on top of this one, she clutched the brass cross tighter. Pastor Elijah found me and gave me his sweater. The pastor stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Rose's shoulder. The police are on their way. They've already picked up Darren, found him passed out in his truck about 10 miles from here. Relief washed over Rose's face, but Hope's lip trembled. Do we have to go back to our apartment? I don't want to. No, sweetie, Rose assured her, though Lorenzo could see the worry in her eyes, worry about what came next. You could... Lorenzo cleared his throat, surprised by how rough his voice sounded. He knelt down beside them, meeting Hope's curious gaze. You could both stay at my house until things are happy again. Hope's eyes widened. The big house with the gate, where Mommy stayed during the storm? Lorenzo nodded, glancing at Rose. If that's all right with your mother. Rose looked at him with such gratitude it made his chest ache. Are you sure? We don't want to impose... Please, Mommy. Hope's small hand reached out, taking Lorenzo's larger one. He feels safe, like the church does. Something shifted in Lorenzo's heart at those words. Simple, childlike wisdom that cut straight through his carefully constructed defenses. He squeezed Hope's hand gently. They spent the day at the church while police handled the formal statements and arrangements. Pastor Elijah brought them soup and sandwiches from his own home, sitting with them as Hope napped on the pew, this time with her head in Rose's lap. The pastor shared quiet words of encouragement, never pushing but simply being present in their time of need. As evening approached, Hope insisted on saying goodbye to Pastor Elijah with a hug, still wearing his cardigan. Can I keep the cross? She asked shyly, to remember that God was watching over me. The pastor smiled, his eyes misting. Of course, child. It's yours now. The The drive back to Lorenzo's estate was quiet, stars beginning to pepper the darkening sky. Hope sat in the back seat, fighting sleep but eventually losing the battle. Rose reached across the center console, taking Lorenzo's hand just as she had during their desperate search the night before. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Lorenzo glanced in the rear-view mirror at Hope's sleeping form, then at their joined hands. Something about this felt right, like pieces falling into place after being scattered for too long. As they passed through his gates, no longer cold and forbidding but welcoming them home, he realized his prayer from days ago had been answered in ways he never could have imagined. The mansion that had once echoed with emptiness now held the soft sounds of Hope's steady breathing and Rose's quiet humming. As they carried the sleeping child inside, Lorenzo knew his life would never be the same, and he was profoundly grateful for that fact. The mansion's halls, once silent as a tomb, now rang with the bright sound of Hope's laughter. Her small feet pattered across marble floors that had known only echoes before, bringing life to every corner she touched. Each morning, Lorenzo found himself waking earlier, drawn by the sounds of life stirring within his home. One sunny Tuesday morning, he paused in the doorway of his kitchen, taking in the sight before him. Hope sat at the counter, her legs swinging as she concentrated on her drawing. Crayons scattered across the granite surface like fallen autumn leaves. Rose stood at the stove, humming an old hymn while stirring oatmeal, her voice lifting and falling in the morning light. "Mr. Lorenzo." Hope waved her paper at him. "Look what I made." He crossed to her, studying the colorful creation. "Is that our house?" "Uh-huh." She pointed with a small finger. "See, there's you and Mommy and me, and Ruth, too." The stick figures stood hand in hand before a towering mansion rendered in purple crayon. Rose glanced over her shoulder, smiling. "Hope, honey, let Mr. Westfield have his breakfast first." "Lorenzo," he corrected gently. "Please, just Lorenzo." Rose's cheeks colored slightly as she nodded, serving 3 bowls of oatmeal topped with fresh berries. Hope's drawing joined dozens of others already decorating the refrigerator, held by magnets shaped like musical notes. A small touch Rose had added to make the kitchen feel more like home. After breakfast, Lorenzo led Hope to the grand piano in the music room. She climbed onto the bench beside him, her face serious with concentration as he showed her where to place her fingers. "Middle C," he explained, guiding her small hand. "That's where everything starts." "Like the beginning of a story?" Hope asked, pressing the key carefully. Lorenzo smiled. "Exactly like that." They practiced simple scales, Hope's determination reminding him of his own childhood lessons. Rose appeared in the doorway, drying her hands on a dish towel, watching them with soft eyes. "Mom!" Hope called out. "Come sing while we play." Rose hesitated, but Lorenzo nodded encouragingly. She joined them, and soon her clear voice filled the room with amazing grace, while Hope picked out the melody one careful note at a time. Lorenzo's fingers found the harmony naturally, weaving beneath Rose's vocals in a way that felt like prayer. Later that afternoon, Rose insisted on teaching Lorenzo how to make grilled cheese sandwiches. "Proper ones," she said, "not those fancy versions with imported cheese." "I haven't cooked since—" He paused, remembering. "Since my mother was sick." Rose touched his arm gently. "Then it's time to learn again." Under her patient guidance, he managed not to burn the bread too badly. Hope declared his efforts almost as good as Mommy's, which made them all laugh. The sound of their shared joy seemed to warm the kitchen more than any fancy heating system ever could. Evenings became their sacred time. After Hope was tucked in, Rose and Lorenzo would sit in his study, talking about everything. and nothing. She told him about her dreams of going back to school someday. He shared stories about his mother's faith, how it had shaped him before he'd lost his way. "God never lost sight of you," Rose said one night, curled in the leather armchair with a cup of tea. "Even when you couldn't feel him." Lorenzo watched the firelight play across her face. "I'm starting to understand that now." Days flowed into weeks. Hope's piano playing improved, filling the house with simple melodies. Rose's bruises faded, leaving behind a woman who stood straighter, smiled easier. Lorenzo found himself checking his phone less, caring about board meetings less, investing instead in these precious moments of connection. But the outside world refused to stay away forever. It started with whispers among the household staff, quickly silenced when Lorenzo approached. Then came the calls from his PR team about increased media interest. He dismissed their concerns, focused instead on helping Hope master Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. The first photos appeared on a Wednesday. Rose had gone to the local grocery store, wanting to cook dinner herself instead of relying on the house staff. A photographer caught her loading bags into her car, the car Lorenzo had insisted she use for safety. By Thursday morning, the tabloid headlines screamed, "Billionaire's secret family," and "Who is the mysterious woman at Westfield Mansion?" Ruth brought him the papers with his morning coffee, her face grave. "Sir, perhaps we should consider a statement?" Lorenzo waved her concerns away, too caught up in watching Hope show Rose her latest drawing, but he couldn't miss the way Rose's hands trembled slightly as she pinned the artwork to the fridge, or how her smile didn't quite reach her eyes when she glanced at the newspapers Ruth carried. That evening, as they sat in the study, Rose broke their comfortable silence. "Maybe we should talk about all this." She gestured vaguely toward the window, where beyond the gates, reporters had begun gathering. "It doesn't matter," Lorenzo said firmly. "They'll find something else to gossip about soon enough." Rose twisted her hands in her lap. "But your reputation means nothing compared to the peace I've found here." He reached across the space between them, taking her restless hands in his. "For the first time in years, I feel truly alive. Hope's laughter, your singing, even these quiet moments, they're worth more than any reputation." Tears glimmered in Rose's eyes. "I just don't want to cause trouble for you. You've done so much for us already." "You've done more for me," Lorenzo insisted. "You and Hope. You've brought God back into these halls. You've reminded me what it means to have faith, to trust, to—" He stopped, words failing him. Rose squeezed his hands, understanding in her silence. Neither of them noticed the camera lens catching their intimate moment through the study window, or knew how tomorrow's headlines would twist their simple joy into scandal. For now, they sat together in the warmth of the fire, while upstairs Hope slept peacefully, her newest drawing of their little family watching over her dreams. The house that had once been Lorenzo's fortress now stood as a testament to transformation. Where cold marble had reflected emptiness, now lay scattered toys and crayon marks. Where silence had reigned, music and laughter danced. And in the heart of it all, three souls were healing, finding in each other the very grace they'd been seeking all along. The morning sun couldn't pierce the dark clouds gathering over Lorenzo's estate. Within days, what had been their peaceful sanctuary erupted into a media circus. Reporters clustered at the gates like hungry vultures, their cameras flashing through the iron bars. "Billionaire virgin falls for Waitress single mom," screamed the headlines in bold red letters. Rose's hands shook as she read the morning paper, her coffee growing cold beside her. Each new story seemed crueler than the last. "Gold digger or guardian angel?" another tabloid questioned, alongside a grainy photo of her shopping at the local grocery store. "Mummy?" Hope's small voice carried across the kitchen. "Why are those people outside taking pictures?" Rose pulled her daughter close, stroking her hair. "They're just curious about Mr. Lorenzo's house, sweetie." "But they're saying mean things," Hope whispered, pressing her face into her mother's side. Lorenzo entered the kitchen, his face tight with concern. Ruth's arranged for extra security at Hope's school. He placed a gentle hand on Rose's shoulder. "We'll get through this." But the harassment only intensified. That afternoon, the school principal called. They'd received dozens of calls from reporters and curious onlookers, all trying to get information about Hope. Some even attempted to photograph the little girl during recess. Rose paced the study, tears streaming down her face. "This has to stop. I can't let Hope go through this." "We'll hire private tutors," Lorenzo suggested, reaching for her hand. "We can protect her here." "Here." Rose's voice cracked. "Lorenzo, look at what I'm doing to your life. Your company's stock dropped 10 points yesterday because of these rumors." "Numbers don't matter," he insisted. "Not anymore. But your reputation is worth nothing compared to what we've found here." He drew her close, his voice soft but firm. "You and Hope. You've brought life back to these halls. Back to me." Still, the headlines grew more vicious. Anonymous sources claimed Rose had orchestrated her attack to gain Lorenzo's sympathy. Others suggested she was using Hope to manipulate him. Each new story felt like a physical blow. Lorenzo's PR team begged him to distance himself, to release a statement clarifying that Rose was simply a guest during a difficult time. Instead, he called a press conference. Standing before a wall of microphones and flashing cameras, Lorenzo spoke from his heart. "6 months ago, I prayed for God to send something meaningful through my gates. He answered with Rose and Hope McKinley." His voice grew stronger. "If showing kindness to a mother and child is suspicious, then perhaps we've lost our way. If love is a scandal, I accept every headline." Rose watched the conference on TV, her heart aching at his defense of her. But she could see the strain in his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. This brilliant, kind man who'd given them shelter was now under attack because of her. That evening, Lorenzo had to attend an emergency board meeting. Before leaving, he found Rose in the music room, watching Hope practice piano. "I'll be back in a few hours," he promised. "Maybe we can all have hot chocolate when I return. Hope's favorite?" Rose nodded, forcing a smile. But inside, her decision was already made. After tucking Hope into bed for what she knew would be the last time in this beautiful house, Rose sat at Lorenzo's piano. Tears fell onto the keys as she wrote her letter. "Dear Lorenzo, you opened your gates to us when we needed shelter from a storm. You showed us kindness without asking anything in return. You gave Hope a safe place to laugh and play. But now I'm the storm in your life, bringing chaos to your peace. You deserve better than headlines and scandal. You deserve the quiet joy you had before we arrived. Thank you for showing us that good people still exist. Thank you for reminding me what it feels like to trust again. But I can't watch you sacrifice everything you've built just because you're too kind to turn us away. You deserve peace. I only bring storms." She packed their few belongings quietly, called a taxi, and slipped out through the service entrance where no reporters waited. Hope stirred only briefly as Rose carried her to the car, mumbling something about saying goodbye to Lorenzo. When Lorenzo returned home 3 hours later, the mansion was dark. His footsteps echoed through silent halls. No piano music, no child's laughter, no soft singing from the kitchen. He found Rose's letter on the piano, the paper still damp with her tears. The same clock that had kept him company through years of solitude now ticked loudly in the crushing silence. Lorenzo sank onto the piano bench, holding Rose's letter to his chest, surrounded once again by all his wealth and none of the warmth that had made it feel like home. Outside, rain began to fall, but this time there would be no desperate knock at his gate, no chance to offer shelter, no opportunity to say all the things his heart had finally learned to feel. The mansion's halls stretched before him, empty once more. But now the silence felt different, not like the peaceful solitude he'd once embraced, but like a void waiting to be filled. Every room held echoes of Hope's laughter, traces of Rose's grace. Their absence felt heavier than any loneliness he'd known before. In the kitchen, Hope's drawings still decorated the refrigerator. In the study, Rose's teacup sat on the side table where she'd left it. These small remnants of their presence made their absence even more profound. Lorenzo walked to the window of his study, pressing his forehead against the cool glass. The rain fell harder now, and somewhere out there, Rose and Hope were facing another storm alone. Because they thought they were protecting him. Because the world had convinced them they weren't worthy of the love they'd brought into his life. The ticking clock marked each moment of this new silence, each second taking them further away from the home they'd created together. The morning sun crept through the mansion's windows, casting long shadows across empty halls that seemed to mock Lorenzo's solitude. He moved from room to room like a man in a trance, calling out names that no longer belonged there. Rose. His voice echoed off marble floors. Hope? Each step revealed another reminder of what he'd lost. In Hope's temporary bedroom, crayon drawings still decorated the walls, cheerful scenes of sunshine and flowers, stick figures holding hands. One showed 3 people standing in front of what looked like his mansion. A tall man in a suit, a woman with a bright smile, and a little girl between them. Written in wobbly letters across the top were the words, "My new family." Lorenzo's hands trembled as he carefully removed each drawing, preserving them as if they were priceless masterpieces. In many ways, they were. The kitchen still held traces of Rose's presence, a cookbook left open to a recipe for chocolate chip cookies, a coffee mug with a lipstick mark on the rim, Hope's favorite cereal bowl in the dish rack. He couldn't bring himself to move any of it. Ruth found him there as morning light flooded the kitchen. He sat at the counter, Rose's letter spread before him, his eyes red and hollow from a sleepless night. Without a word, she placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, a gesture so unlike her usual businesslike manner that it nearly broke him. "She's gone, Ruth," he whispered. "They're both gone." "I know, sir." Ruth's voice was soft with understanding. "I heard them leave last night. I should have stopped them." Lorenzo shook his head. "She made her choice. To protect me." He laughed bitterly. "All my wealth, and I couldn't protect them from cruel words and camera flashes." The days that followed blurred together. Lorenzo hired private investigators, but Rose had vanished completely. She'd changed her phone number, left her previous job, moved from her old apartment. Even Hope's school records had been transferred to an undisclosed location. Every lead went cold. His executive assistant rescheduled meeting after meeting as Lorenzo spent hours in his study, making calls, searching databases, trying to find any trace of them. Board members grew increasingly concerned about his absence, but he couldn't focus on profit margins and quarterly reports when his heart was searching every street corner for a glimpse of Rose's smile or the sound of Hope's laughter. Nights stretched endlessly. He would walk the halls until dawn, remembering how Hope's footsteps had once echoed through them as she played hide and seek. How Rose's voice had filled the kitchen with hymns while she cooked. How the 3 of them had sat at his grand piano, Hope learning simple melodies while Rose watched with pride. 2 weeks passed. Then 3. The media circus eventually moved on to newer scandals, leaving Lorenzo alone with his regret. The mansion settled back into its familiar silence. But what had once felt like peaceful solitude now felt like a tomb. On the anniversary of his mother's death, Lorenzo sat in his leather chair by the fireplace, holding his old prayer journal. Normally this day brought waves of grief for his mother, but tonight his heart ached for a different kind of loss. He opened the journal to a fresh page and began to write. "Dear Lord, I asked for a sign, and you sent an angel. 2 angels, really. A mother and child who taught me more about faith in their brief stay than I'd learned in all my years of wealth and success. Rose showed me that true grace doesn't need golden halls to shine. Hope reminded me how to laugh, how to wonder, how to believe in goodness again. I let them go. Or perhaps I should say, I failed to fight hard enough to make them stay. I thought my wealth could protect them, but I forgot that love needs more than money to grow. It needs courage. It needs faith. Most of all, it needs to be spoken aloud, not just felt in silence. Forgive me, Lord, for waiting too long to tell them what they meant to me. Forgive me for not running after them that night. Forgive me for all the words left unsaid." Lorenzo closed the journal slowly, his vision blurred with tears. The fire crackled softly as he whispered into the empty room, "If love ever returns, I won't shut the gate again." Ruth appeared silently in the doorway, holding a tray with tea. She'd been doing this every year on this date, ever since his mother passed. But tonight, seeing him broken in a different way, she set the tray down and did something unprecedented. She sat in the chair opposite him. "Your mother would have loved them," she said quietly. "Especially Hope. That child had her same laugh." Lorenzo looked up, surprised. Ruth rarely spoke of his mother. "She would have told you to fight for them." Ruth continued. "Sarah never did believe in letting fear win over love." "I didn't just lose them, Ruth," Lorenzo admitted. "I lost my chance to become the man they helped me remember I could be. The man who believes in more than bank accounts and board meetings." Ruth stood, straightening her apron with dignity. "Then perhaps, sir, that's the man you need to become anyway, with or without them here to see it." She left him with that thought, her footsteps fading down the hall. Lorenzo turned back to the fire, watching flames dance across logs that would eventually burn to ash. Everything ends, he thought, but some things, if you're brave enough to fight for them, can begin again. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily, marking time in a house that felt frozen between what was and what could have been. Outside his window, stars sparkled in the clear night sky, the same stars that might be shining down on Rose and Hope wherever they were. He hoped they were safe. He hoped they were warm. Most of all, he hoped they knew that somewhere, in a mansion full of gold but empty of joy, a man was learning to pray again because of them. 2 weeks dragged by like years. Lorenzo Westfield stood before his bedroom mirror, adjusting his black tie with trembling fingers. The charity gala invitation had sat on his desk for months. Another obligation, another evening of calculated smiles and practiced small talk. But tonight felt different. His reflection showed a man changed, thinner, paler, with shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. "Sir." Ruth appeared in the doorway. "The car is ready." He nodded, unable to find words. The drive into Denver passed in silence, city lights blurring past his window like stars falling. The venue, the grand ballroom at the Riverside Hotel, blazed with photographers' flashes and the sparkle of evening gowns. Lorenzo stepped out of his car, straightening his shoulders despite the weight pressing down on them. Inside, conversations hushed as he entered. Whispers followed him like shadows. The scandal might have died down in the papers, but here, among society's elite, it still simmered. He caught fragments of murmured comments. "Living with that waitress. Reputation in tatters. What was he thinking? The event coordinator, Mrs. Helena Mitchell, approached with a practiced smile. "Mr. Westfield, we're so pleased you could join us. You're scheduled to speak after dinner about your company's charitable initiatives." He hadn't prepared a speech, hadn't even thought about one. But as he sat through the 5-course meal, barely tasting the food, words began forming in his mind. Not the carefully crafted corporate message he usually delivered, but something raw and true. The television cameras were rolling when he finally stood at the podium. Hundreds of faces looked up at him, waiting for the polished billionaire they knew. Instead, they saw a man stripped of pretense. "Good evening," he began, his voice soft but carrying clearly through the silent room. "I'm supposed to talk about numbers tonight, about tax benefits and charitable giving, about how wealth can solve problems if we just write big enough checks." He paused, looking down at his hands gripping the podium. "But I've learned recently that the greatest poverty isn't in bank accounts. It's in hearts that have forgotten how to feel, in homes filled with everything money can buy, but empty of what matters most." The room grew absolutely still. Even the cameramen leaned forward. "I was a man who could buy comfort but never peace. My mansion was a fortress built of gold, but inside I was alone. Then," his voice caught slightly, "then a woman showed me that compassion is the only true wealth." Phones came out, recording his every word. In the back of the room, Mrs. Mitchell was frantically signaling her staff. This wasn't the expected speech about corporate responsibility. She worked double shifts serving coffee. She prayed before every meal, even when the meal was simple bread. She showed kindness to everyone, even to a bitter man who'd forgotten how to receive it. Her daughter? He smiled faintly, remembering Hope's drawings on his refrigerator. Her daughter filled my empty halls with laughter. Lorenzo looked directly into the nearest camera, no longer seeing the audience. The media called it a scandal. They called her a gold digger, but Rose McKinley taught me more about real value in 3 weeks than I'd learned in 20 years of building my fortune. She showed me that grace doesn't need marble floors to dance on, that faith doesn't require crystal chandeliers to shine. Tears glistened in several eyes now. Someone in the back began to applaud, but quickly stopped, sensing he wasn't finished. I let fear of public opinion drive away the 2 people who made my house a home. I stood silent while others questioned their character. Tonight, I'm breaking that silence. If there's a scandal here, it's not that a waitress and her daughter found shelter in a billionaire's home. It's that it took them to teach me what real shelter means. His hands were steady now as he concluded. My company will continue its charitable work, but I've learned that true charity isn't about tax write-offs or public recognition. It's about opening your gate when grace comes knocking, even if it arrives in unexpected ways. Thank you. The silence held for 3 heartbeats before the room erupted in applause. As he stepped down from the podium, phones buzzed with notifications. His speech was already going viral. The hashtag #CompassionIsWealth started trending within minutes. But Lorenzo didn't stay to bask in the response. He slipped out while others were still clapping, nodding briefly to Ruth, who waited by the exit. The drive home was quiet again, but different now, as if speaking his truth had shifted something in the air itself. The mansion loomed dark against the night sky when they arrived. Lorenzo walked slowly to the gate where he'd first found Rose. From his pocket, he took a single candle, one of the ones Hope had loved to watch flicker in the evenings, and lit it carefully. The small flame danced in the gentle breeze as he placed it securely by the gate. Standing there, remembering how Rose had collapsed in this very spot, he whispered into the wind, "Come home." The words carried no command, only longing, only hope, only truth. Ruth watched from the car, her usual stoic expression softening as her employer stood vigil by the candlelight. She didn't call out or hurry him along. Some moments, she knew, needed to be lived fully, even if they broke your heart. The candle flickered, casting gentle shadows on the iron bars of the gate. Bars that had once kept the world out, but now seemed to be keeping him in. Lorenzo stayed there until the flame burned low, then turned and walked back into his empty home, leaving the light to guide whatever grace might pass by in the night. The grandfather clock in Lorenzo's study chimed 7 times, its deep resonance echoing through the quiet halls. Outside, snow fell in thick, lazy flakes, coating the Colorado mountains in pristine white. Lorenzo sat in his leather armchair, a worn Bible open on his lap, though his eyes had stopped tracking the words minutes ago. The flames in the fireplace cast dancing shadows across the room, reminding him of how Hope used to watch them with wonder. 3 weeks had passed since his speech at the gala, and while public opinion had shifted dramatically in Rose's favor, she remained out of reach. His security team had respected her wish for privacy, leaving him with nothing but memories and hope. He traced his finger over the passage he'd been trying to read, something about patience and faith, when a sound caught his attention. At first it seemed like just another whisper of wind against the windows, but then it came again, a gentle tapping, distant but distinct, coming from the direction of the front gate. Lorenzo lifted his head, listening intently. The security system hadn't triggered any alerts. Probably just ice falling from the trees, he thought, trying to return to his reading. Then, carried on the winter air, came a small voice that stopped his heart. "Mr. Lorenzo." The Bible slipped from his hands, thumping against the carpet as he shot to his feet. That voice, he would know it anywhere. Hope's voice. Not bothering with a coat, Lorenzo rushed through the mansion's halls, past Ruth, who called out in confusion, and straight to the front door. His hands trembled as he pulled it open, letting in a gust of snow-laden wind. There, beyond the ornate iron gates that had for so long kept the world at bay, stood 2 figures illuminated by the security lights. Hope, bundled in a pink winter coat that made her look like a tiny rosebud in the snow, her small hand clasped firmly in her mother's. Rose stood tall despite the cold, snowflakes catching in her dark hair like stars. Her eyes met his across the distance, carrying a mix of uncertainty and something else, something that looked like coming home. "I couldn't stay gone," Rose said quietly, her words visible in the frozen air. "Knowing you prayed for us." Lorenzo's feet carried him through the snow to the gate's control panel. Hope bounced slightly on her toes, her face bright with excitement despite the cold. "Mommy says you're the only one who asked God for us without wanting anything back," Hope added shyly, her words carrying the simple wisdom of childhood. Lorenzo felt tears well up in his eyes, crystallizing in the winter air. His fingers found the gate release, and the iron barriers that had once symbolized his isolation began to swing open with a soft creak. "You both belong here," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. Hope didn't wait for the gates to fully open. She slipped her hand free from Rose's and darted through the gap, running straight to Lorenzo. Without hesitation, he knelt in the snow and caught her in his arms, holding her close as she wrapped her small arms around his neck. "I missed your piano," Hope confided in his ear, making him laugh through his tears. Rose approached more slowly, her boots crunching in the fresh snow. When she reached them, Lorenzo stood, still holding Hope, and met Rose's gaze. "I'm sorry," they both said at the same time, then shared a small laugh that seemed to warm the winter air. "The media," Rose began, but Lorenzo shook his head. "Doesn't matter," he said firmly. "Nothing matters except that you're here." Hope wiggled in his arms, pointing toward the mansion's warm glow. "Can we go inside? My nose is cold." The simple request broke the moment's tension, and Lorenzo nodded, suddenly aware he was standing in the snow without a coat. Of course. Come on. Together they walked toward the house, their footprints marking a path in the fresh snow. The warm light from the windows spilled out onto the white ground, creating a golden pathway to welcome them home. Ruth stood in the doorway, her usual stern expression softened by a slight smile. "I'll prepare some hot chocolate," she said, stepping aside to let them enter. "With extra marshmallows for Miss Hope." "3 marshmallows?" Hope asked hopefully as Lorenzo set her down. "3 marshmallows," Ruth confirmed, already heading towards the kitchen. Rose paused in the foyer, taking in the familiar surroundings. The grand staircase, the crystal chandelier, the family portraits lining the walls. Her eyes lingered on the spot where her drawings had once decorated the refrigerator door. "They're still here," Lorenzo said softly, reading her thoughts. "I kept everything. Hope's drawings, your recipe notes, even that burned pot from when we tried to make caramel." Rose laughed, a sound that seemed to bring warmth back to the mansion's halls. "I told you to watch the temperature." "I was distracted," Lorenzo admitted, his eyes holding hers. "I still am." Hope had already shed her pink coat and boots, leaving them in a small pile by the door. She padded across the marble floor in her sock feet, heading straight for the study where the fireplace still glowed. "Can I play the piano later?" she called over her shoulder. "Of course," Lorenzo answered, helping Rose with her coat. Their fingers brushed as he hung it on the rack, sending a current of warmth through both of them. They followed Hope into the study, where she had already claimed her favorite spot on the hearth. Rug. The Bible Lorenzo had dropped still lay open on the floor by his chair. Rose picked it up gently, noting the well-worn pages. "You've been reading again?" Lorenzo nodded, watching as she carefully closed the book and placed it on the side table. "Every day. It helps me remember what matters." Ruth appeared with a tray of hot chocolate, steam rising from 3 mugs topped with precise arrangements of marshmallows. Hope counted hers carefully before taking her first sip, leaving a small chocolate mustache that made both adults smile. As they settled into the warmth of the room, the snow continuing to fall outside the windows, Lorenzo felt something shift in his heart. The mansion no longer echoed with emptiness. Instead, it hummed with the quiet joy of presence, Hope's gentle humming as she sipped her cocoa, Rose's soft movements as she tucked a blanket around her daughter's shoulders, the crackle of the fire that seemed to welcome them all home. The walls of gold he had built around himself hadn't protected him. They had imprisoned him. But here, now, with snowflakes melting on Rose's hair and Hope's laughter filling the air, he understood what true shelter meant. It wasn't found in fortresses or fortunes, but in the simple grace of hearts opening to let love in. "I prayed too," Hope announced suddenly, looking up from her cocoa. "Every night, I asked God to make you not lonely anymore." Lorenzo met Rose's eyes over their daughter's head, seeing in them the same mixture of wonder and certainty he felt in his own heart. "He answered all our prayers," he said softly. "He sent them wrapped in grace." Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the world in pristine white. But inside the mansion's walls, warmed by firelight and fellowship, 3 hearts that had once been separated by fear found themselves bound together by something stronger, the simple, profound truth that love, when given freely, always finds its way home. Inside the mansion, warmth and life seemed to flow through every room once again. The grand foyer sparkled with holiday lights that Lorenzo had put up weeks ago, hoping they would somehow guide his family home. Now their glow felt like a celebration. Ruth bustled around the kitchen, her usual efficiency tinged with poorly hidden joy as she prepared hot cocoa. The familiar scents of chocolate and cinnamon wafted through the air, mixing with the pine fragrance from the half-decorated Christmas tree in the great room. "Look, Mommy," Hope called out, holding up a crystal angel ornament. "Mr. Lorenzo saved all the pretty ones for me to put up." She stood on tiptoe, trying to reach a higher branch. Lorenzo stepped forward to lift her gently, supporting her as she placed the angel exactly where she wanted it. "I couldn't finish it without you," he said softly. It didn't feel right. Rose watched them from the doorway, her heart full, but her eyes showing traces of guilt. The past weeks had been harder than she'd imagined, not just surviving, but carrying the weight of what she'd left behind. She moved closer to Lorenzo as he set Hope down, her fingers twisting nervously. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice catching. I was convinced I was ruining everything you'd built, your reputation, your peace. I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't just taking advantage of your kindness." Lorenzo turned to face her fully, his expression gentle but serious. He took her hands in his, noting how they trembled slightly in his grasp. "You were never my burden, Rose. You were my answer." His thumbs traced small circles on her palms as he continued. "When I prayed that night in the storm, I wasn't asking for success or security. I was asking for life. Real life. You and Hope brought that back to me." Ruth appeared with a tray of steaming cocoa mugs, each topped with a generous swirl of whipped cream. "Just like old times," she said, her usual gruffness softened by genuine warmth. "Though this time, I hope you're all staying put." Hope abandoned her decorating to claim her mug, carefully carrying it to the plush rug near the fireplace. "We are staying, aren't we, Mummy?" she asked, her face serious over her whipped cream mustache. Rose looked up at Lorenzo, seeing in his eyes everything she'd been afraid to hope for: love, acceptance, and the promise of belonging. "If that's what Lorenzo wants," she said softly. "What I want," Lorenzo replied, his voice thick with emotion, "is to love you both, properly and patiently, for as long as you'll let me." He squeezed her hands gently. "I love you, Rose McKinley, not because you needed help or because you changed me, but because you showed me what grace really looks like." Tears spilled down Rose's cheeks as she smiled. "I love you too," she whispered. "I tried not to. Tried to be practical and strong, but—" Lorenzo drew her closer, one hand rising to cup her cheek. In the firelight, with Hope humming Christmas carols nearby and Ruth pretending not to watch from the doorway, they shared their first kiss. It was gentle and reverent, a prayer of gratitude made flesh. When they parted, Hope clapped delightedly, making them both laugh. The sound echoed through the mansion, chasing away the last shadows of loneliness from its corners. Later that night, after Hope was tucked into her old bed and Rose had fallen asleep reading in the library, Lorenzo stood by the window, watching the snow fall. The grounds glittered under the moonlight, transformed into something magical and new. He closed his eyes, his heart overflowing with gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered, "for not just giving me love, but for giving me a family born from grace, for teaching me that the greatest wealth isn't what we own, but who we cherish." The snow continued to fall outside, each flake a tiny miracle of perfect design. Inside, the mansion had become what it was always meant to be, not a monument to success, but a home where love could grow and faith could flourish. Tonight, its walls held not gold, but something far more precious: the sound of family, the warmth of belonging, and the quiet certainty that grace, when given room to work, could transform even the coldest places into sanctuaries of love. Spring painted the Colorado Valley in vibrant colors, turning Lorenzo Westfield's once austere estate into a haven of new life. Purple crocuses and yellow daffodils dotted the rolling lawns of what was now known as the Gracegate Foundation, their faces turned toward the warming sun. "Mommy, look, the roses are blooming." Hope's voice carried across the garden she'd helped plant last fall. Her 7-year-old hands had insisted on placing each bulb herself, guided by Lorenzo's patient instructions. Now she darted between the neat rows, her sundress fluttering like butterfly wings. Rose looked up from her desk in the Foundation's main office, formerly Lorenzo's study. Where intimidating mahogany and leather once dominated, now soft, natural light streamed through unveiled windows. Her desk held files of women and children they'd helped transition to safety and independence over the past months. "Those are the Hope Roses," Lorenzo said, appearing in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee. "They're special hybrid tea roses that bloom earlier than most." He set 1 cup beside Rose, his hand lingering on her shoulder. "Just like someone else we know who blooms wherever she's planted." Rose covered his hand with hers, her engagement ring catching the light. "I never imagined that night at the gate would lead to all this," she said softly. "You've given so many women a chance at a new life. We've given them that chance," Lorenzo corrected gently. "Your experience helps them trust us. You show them that healing is possible." Through the window, they watched Hope carefully picking flowers for the upcoming ceremony. The church where she'd been found during that desperate search had become sacred ground for their family. It seemed only fitting to exchange their vows there, surrounded by the community they'd built through the Foundation. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the small church filled with faces that told stories of redemption, women who'd found strength to start over, children who'd learned to laugh again, volunteers who'd discovered purpose in service. Ruth sat in the front row, dabbing her eyes despite her attempts to maintain her usual stoic demeanor. Hope walked down the aisle first, scattering rose petals with careful concentration. Her dress matched the roses in her basket, and her smile lit up the sanctuary. When Rose appeared in the doorway, Lorenzo felt his breath catch. She wore a simple white dress, elegant and understated, but her face glowed with joy that no designer gown could match. During the ceremony, Lorenzo pulled out his weathered journal, the last one he'd written in before closing that chapter of his solitary life. His voice steady but full of emotion, he read, "I was a man who built walls of gold to keep pain away, but when I opened my gate, love came bleeding and brought heaven with her. In my weakness I almost lost this gift, but grace led her back, teaching me that true wealth isn't measured in what we keep, but in what we give away." Rose's eyes filled with tears as she squeezed his hands. The pastor smiled warmly as he pronounced them husband and wife, and Hope rushed forward to embrace them both before they could even kiss, making the congregation laugh. As dusk settled over the valley that evening, the 3 of them walked hand in hand down the gravel path toward home. The Foundation's gate, the same one where Rose had collapsed that stormy night, stood wide open, its iron scrollwork softened by climbing roses. Hope skipped between them, humming the wedding march. The sky painted itself in brilliant shades of pink and gold, as if nature itself celebrated their union. Lorenzo looked at his family, the brave woman who'd taught him to trust love again, and the child who'd shown him how to find wonder in simple things. The gate that had once served as a barrier now stood as a symbol of welcome, its open doors inviting others to find the same grace that had transformed their lives. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.